Now, the other day from an interview with Tony Gilroy in Empire Magazine, and he is, of course, the showrunner of the upcoming Andor series, we learned what the general game plan or outline for the whole series is going to be, which is that it will take place or start roughly 5 years before the events of Rogue One. The first season of 12 episodes will then cover roughly 1 year of time, while the second and final season of the series will also be 12 episodes, split into 4 3-episode blocks, with each block covering 1 year and leading right up into the start of Rogue One. Which basically then means after Rogue One was a prequel to A New Hope, one that literally led right into the start of that film, Andor will now do the exact same thing for Rogue One. It's a prequel leading right into the start of that film, which makes me wonder what character they can introduce in Andor that they can then make into yet another prequel series that will lead right into the start of that one, and then they can just keep working backwards and get all the way to the prequels at some point. And I'm of course joking, or so I think and hope, but this is getting a little silly, isn't it? That they keep telling stories in reverse or disjointed order, that we're now getting a prequel to a prequel essentially, that we're getting a story to explain a character in a story that no one really wanted explained or explored, because it was the story itself that was important when it comes to Rogue One, just the getting of the plans to the Death Star, not necessarily the characters within it. I mean, I'm just not sure how many people there were who walked out of Rogue One and thought to themselves, I really hope we get a good Cassian Andor backstory someday, that maybe we could get it made into a whole series even. And sure, there's nothing to say an Andor backstory couldn't be good, and it's not going to just be about him. It looks like Mon Mothma will be a big part of the series as well. We're likely going to go deeper into the politics of the time than ever seen before, which, yeah, that could be interesting. This could certainly end up being a political thriller with more depth and intrigue than anything else we've gotten from Star Wars lately, that's for sure. And to be completely honest with you, after the trailer we got at Celebration a little over a month ago now, I am, pretty excited and hopeful for this, which I know after feeling more than a little let down by both the Book of Boba Fett and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, both of which had great trailers, mind you, it makes me sound like a fool who likes going back for more and more abuse from Disney. It's like I just can't cope with the fact that Star Wars is simply something that Disney sees as a means by which to make money, that the stories and characters aren't really all that important to them, that they're simply assets used to get people to watch and then to keep making money, that for them a good show isn't one that receives praise from the fans or even is highly regarded by critics, but rather simply one that gets people to watch and keeps people subscribed to Disney Plus or keeps putting butts in seats at a theater. But then when I get discouraged, I do remember that actually Lucasfilm is capable of making great Star Wars here in the Disney era, that there are some within the company who do care and do try for the fans, like Filoni and Favreau, for example, that the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian were excellent and that The Bad Batch was rather enjoyable as well. I also thought Rebels, though not on par with the Clone Wars, was also pretty good. And speaking of Clone Wars, we did get Season 7 of it here in the Disney era, which featured some of the best Star Wars I've seen pretty much ever, that being the Siege of Mandalore arc. Not to mention, Rogue One was also very enjoyable, easily the best Star Wars film of the Disney era, and more than worthy to be put alongside the films of the pre-Disney era. And considering that film was also in large part the work of Tony Gilroy, who again is doing the Andor series, I do have hope for this. I do think this could end up not only being enjoyable, but if this is well-made, a well-made political thriller, it could end up being the best Star Wars series to date, even better than The Mandalorian has been. But then again, no matter how great and or well-written and enjoyable it may end up being, it still has the same problem most, if not all, recent Star Wars content has had, which is it really isn't exploring anything new. It's a story with very finite places to go, and a definitive endpoint to align with for both the main characters and the story itself. And so I can't help but feel like Star Wars is becoming, or simply is at this point, something that just wants to take the known, or the somewhat known, and to explore it further and or elaborate on it as much as possible. It wants to keep luring you back with the same old familiar things instead of actually exploring the unknown and expanding the franchise. It no longer tells you new stories and keeps things fresh, as much as it tells you more about the stories and characters you already know. Even The Mandalorian suffers from this problem, though to a much, much lesser extent than something like the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which, like the upcoming Andor series, has or had very little wiggle room with its main characters and story, and arguably adds little to nothing that really needed to be known. Or at least the first season of The Mandalorian avoided this problem or issue, and it pretty much only used brand new characters and didn't deal with things connected to the bigger picture. It was its own little slice of the Star Wars galaxy, and, go figure, didn't see much of any fan backlash at all because there was nothing to get angry about in terms of continuity. Even though it wasn't perfect, fans were just able to sit back and enjoy it without worrying about implications to the canon. For the most part anyway, that is, because Grogu does bring up a bunch of questions, doesn't he? But anyway, then Season 2 came along, and though I'm not saying I didn't necessarily enjoy it, but it brought in characters like Luke and Ahsoka and really started to remind us that, like it or not, for better or worse, all roads lead to the sequel trilogy, that we're still stuck in a relatively fixed point on the Star Wars timeline, where only certain things can and will happen, unless they end up retconning the sequels, which, quite honestly, is very, very unlikely to happen, though it would certainly put the intrigue back into this time period, back into the Mando era, to have things suddenly be so wide open. But again, I don't see that ever happening, especially not with the new book Shadows of the Sith bending over backwards to try and make sense of the sequels, and perhaps if people are interested, I'll do a video on that book in the near future. Either way, the good news is it seems like Season 3 of The Mandalorian is set to do something rather intelligent by going much further into Mandalorian affairs, which is all something we know virtually nothing about in this time period, and even leading up to this time period and after it. Though that said, we also know that the show will ultimately connect with other shows set in the same Mando time period and lead into some type of crossover event. And I'd have to imagine the main threat in this time period and for this crossover series will indeed be Thrawn and the remnants of the Empire, or maybe they'll throw us a big curveball and it'll be the Chiss Ascendancy led by Thrawn that ends up warring with the New Republic and weakens them, thus paving the way for the First Order to take over somehow. Even though the Aftermath trilogy said that the New Republic just decided to reduce their military capacity by 90% for reasons. Though yet another possible curveball could be making the Grisk the big bad guys of the Mando era and this upcoming crossover event. And they are an alien race, sort of a little bit like the Yuuzhan Vong from Legends that we've learned a great deal about in the new Thrawn trilogies, which would certainly be something a little new and different for the time period, and where Thrawn and the Ascendancy could unite with the New Republic, but it ultimately leaves them open to attack from the First Order, or at the very least explains why they signed an armistice with them instead of just dealing with the remnants of the Empire. In other words, sure, some interesting things could be done with The Mandalorian and other shows in this time period and with the big crossover event, but they still have to lead into the sequels. Everything, again, for better or worse, depending on your point of view, has to lead into the sequels. We're just building towards a fixed point in time, and one that sees the utter destruction of the New Republic, meaning anything done with them in the meantime, or with the Jedi Order, which also gets destroyed, is pretty much irrelevant. So anyway, in closing here, am I excited for Andor? Yes. Yes, I am. You can call me a fool if you want, I do deserve it. But I do think there's potential for an interesting story, though it's still one that we know the way it has to end. And though I have been enjoying the Mando era for the most part, and I know there are many, many more years of it to come in terms of content, we know Disney will milk the era dry, I really just wish we could move on already. I really wish we could be excited for Star Wars again, because we didn't know what was going to happen next, instead of constantly being told how what we already know happened. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about Andor. Are you excited for it? Do you just want to see Star Wars move on to a whole different time period already? Or what do you want the franchise to do? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.